I've just done what most bike journalists don't do, and I certainly haven't done that often, and that's buy a bike. Given what we do for a living, there's invariably a stream of new bikes passing through our hands, so the need to spend our own money isn't often necessary. But I've got a new pet project I'm starting, and I needed a bike full time, so I've bought one. If I had the money, which I don't at the moment, then I would probably have bought a new Aprilia Tuono or maybe a KTM 1290 Super Duke R, given what I want to do with the bike. I'm not quite that liquid at the moment, and the professional road tester in me knows deep down that these bikes are, in any case, overkill for most riding scenarios. I know for a fact that I've been faster down certain roads and enjoyed the experience more on what are now classed as middleweight naked sport bikes. And so if I was sufficiently wealthy, I would have immediately headed down to my local KTM dealer and bought the 890 Duke R. But new, with all the extras I want on the bike, including paying for the right to wheelie and getting the full suite of electronic rider aids and a set of heated grips, I'm in for a little over 14,000 euros, or just north of 240,000 Rand. So, after all the disappointment, I got a grip, worked out what was a realistic amount for me, and decided that if I didn't eat for a couple of weeks and made the dogs go out to work, then I could probably stretch to about 10,500 euros, or 175,000 Rand. So that opens up the possibility of the base KTM 890 Duke, or Triumph Street Triple R, not the top RS, or the basest of base versions of BMW's F900R, or possibly even Kawasaki's Z900. I just couldn't go for either the Triumph or KTM because not only do they dumb down the suspension and brakes and other bits and pieces, they also take away the final bit of zest, the extra top-end serving of a half dozen or so horsepower that makes their engines in the R and RS versions quite so entertaining, alive. And having ridden those top models, I just couldn't face riding such inferior examples of the breed, even if the inferiority is in reality not that big. I love all the technology on the BMW, but you have to pay for all those options. And though ultimately it has surprisingly good handling despite its relatively heavy weight, it's the engine that stopped me seriously considering it. It's wholesome and grunty through the mid-range, but with only 105 horsepower, it does feel, in comparison to some of these other bikes, like the top end has been strangled, and when you're in the mood to play, the BMW just isn't exciting enough. At least for me. The Kawasaki is a more viable option, but I find it a bit bland, and I'm just not into the looks. It's undeniably competent at most things, but it's properly powerful too, although it's an inline four, not my favourite. And it just doesn't have the playful chassis I'm looking for in a bike I'm going to live with on a daily basis. And so I am left with the one very obvious choice, and it is this, Yamaha's MT-09. This bike offers the best value sporting package in a road bike, naked or otherwise, that you can buy at the moment. It is a serious bargain, and to be honest, they could probably get away with charging another 15 or 20,000 Rand more for it, and nobody would even blink. Like this, with a few extras including the little fly screen, a radiator guard, the shortened number plate holder and a set of heated grips, all official Yamaha accessories by the way, I still managed a few tanks worth of fuel in terms of change from my 10,500 euros budget. Yes, it's last year's colour, but that's because I'm not keen on the black or blue options, and when I saw the colour I thought I wanted in the flesh, Cyan Storm or whatever it's called, I didn't actually like it that much, and I really wanted this colour from 2021, and luckily I managed to track one down. Okay, enough explaining about the logic of my choice. Let me try and show you why this bike is so very, very good. We can't start anywhere other than the engine because it is quite simply fan-bloody-tastic. Really, it's a gem.
a genuinely great engine, I think.
I know we journalists, and I definitely include myself in this, can be a little too free and easy with words like great and fantastic, but this 890cc 3-cylinder cross-plane crank motor is unquestionably deserving of this kind of hyperbole.
Loads of creamy, smooth, easily accessible grunt means it's just so easy to use and to ride when you're doing the daily humdrum, ordinary type of riding that you do so often. Yeah, it makes even those boring bits of riding quite enjoyable.
2021's engine gained its capacity via a lengthened stroke, and although peak torque has increased a touch to 93 Newton meters, it does, more significantly, arrive 1500 RPM earlier at 7000 RPM.
All very civilized, but twist the throttle just a little more eagerly and you have an engine that is seriously addictive, with the way it just grunts, rolling on and off the throttle. It really is very entertaining and respectably quick as well.
118 horsepower is a healthy number, more than the base KTM 890 Duke and Triumph Street Triple R, but 3 or 4 horsepower down on the Duke R and RS Triumph. But I don't care. I'm not sure I could feel it even in a back-to-back comparison test, because the way this thing surges through the mid-range and heads off to the red line, it really doesn't feel like it's lacking any horsepower. You could add in another 3 or 4 and I'm honestly not sure you'd feel it.
Accelerate out of a tight corner in first gear and it'll happily stand on its back wheel. But more amusingly, it'll do exactly the same thing in second or third gear off a crest in the road, or if you just give it a little bit of a tickle of the clutch. It's a very entertaining engine, and that's because of the deliciously responsive mid-range and a top end that doesn't fade away when you want it to join in the fun. This is a seriously good time bike. It's a party animal. It was always a party animal, and I was afraid with this latest generation that they might have taken that away from it, but no worries. The party animal is still in here, alive and well, and very much ready to party whenever you're in the mood.
Of course, all that partying is no good if your smiles turn to tears when the corners arrive, and that was always the previous bike's weak spot. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. A slightly cumbersome front end and a soggy arse meant to go fast. You had to learn to live with a bit of bucking and weaving that went with it.
The old bike could get a shift on, but there was always that bit of anxiety hanging around in the background when you barreled into a fast turn, and that's because there wasn't a great deal of connection with the front end. Some bikes are so eager to lean and hold a line that they almost suck you into a corner. This new bike feels very much like that, if lacking a slight bit of connection. But I'm sure with a little bit of fiddling, I can get it even closer to what I'm looking for.
It's at this point that I might wish I'd had another 25,000 rand or so to spend, because then I could have had the SP version with its uprated forks and Erlin's rear shock. Or do I? Because I reckon I can probably get a new rear shock and fork springs for less than that, if I end up deciding to go that way.
I've only had the bike a couple of days now, but even though I've been doing some enthusiastic running in, I've still covered 500 kilometres of, well, twisty mountain road, and already I can tell that I need to start fiddling with the suspension. At the rear end, most obviously, I can notice that its lack of smooth, oily damping means I'm going to have to start there.
Deadline for this report means I don't have too much time to fiddle now, but I will do so and get back to you if it makes any noticeable difference. Basically, at the moment, it feels too soft and with a noticeable lack of rebound damping, so it can develop quite the bounce when you get some bumps on the way into and actually through the turn as well. It's not horrendous or anything, but it's noticeable enough to act like a kind of soft limiter on your hooning potential. Overall though, I am really happy with the improvements they've made with the handling. It's just the nitpicky road tester in me that unfairly expects more from my budget sport bike suspension.
What I can't grumble about is the two-way quick shifter. It is excellent. Smooth, precise, it even works pretty well at low speeds, which most of these systems usually don't. And while I'm on about not grumbling, the brakes also excellent. Loads of power, plenty of feel, you can use them deep into a corner. Yeah, very impressive considering they don't have any fancy Italian labels on them.
And that just leaves me with the electronics, which are possibly the most serious improvement over the previous generation. Of course, we have various ride modes and ABS and traction control, but thanks to a brain that borrows R1 technology to let it understand how the bike is behaving on 6 different axes, pitch, yaw, lean, all that sort of thing, all those systems are now lean angle sensitive. And you get different levels of anti-lift on the front and anti-slip, which is more to do with how far the rear wheel can step out of line with the front than it is traditional traction control, which simply limits wheel spin, even while the bike is completely upright. The screen is only 3.5 inches, yes, it is a bit small, and it looks pretty poor next to, say, a BMW F900R, so just don't park next to one of those. The KTM's is only a little bit bigger and even more boring to look at, so don't worry about them. It's pretty legible though, despite the lack of real estate for all the info, and I really like the thumb-operated scrolling wheel that you also press to activate something. Same with the mode buttons, they're all nice and easy to use. That's a decent description of the bike as a whole, really. It's an easy bike to use. A relative novice will find it a friendly, approachable machine for developing their skills, but an experienced rider will also discover a seriously entertaining sport bike with a brilliant engine and a chassis to match that is only compromised in full attack mode by some budget suspension. It was a no-brainer really. No other bike in the middleweight naked sport bike class comes even close. Even if I'd had another 1,000 or 2,000 euros, I wouldn't have taken the KTM Duke 890 or Triumph Street Triple RS. I might just have spent it on the SP version of this, or kept it in my bank and used it for more accessories, potentially including an upgraded rear shock. The only thing that would tempt me away from the Yamaha would have been a fully spec'd version of KTM's 890 Duke R, and that scalpel would have sliced another 4,000 euros out of me to do so. 40% or 70,000 rand more costly, but I don't think 40% more enjoyable. So yeah, I'm very happy with my choice. I've definitely bought the right bike, but then given what I do for a living, you'd be disappointed if I'd bought the wrong bike, wouldn't you? Time for an ad break now, but as always, if you want more detail and discussion about this bike or feel like getting involved with the comments, please head over to our YouTube channel. So I'm happy with my choice, and the MT-09 is a genuinely excellent bike. But being the waffling ex-magazine road test editor that I am, and with YouTube having no time restrictions, there's some more stuff I'd like to share. But I will not be offended if you've had your fill of this particular model and decide to turn off now. However, for those of you who have got an MT-09 or are maybe thinking about getting one, then this extended discussion of the more nerdy details of ownership might be of interest to you. In which case, let me expand a little. Firstly, let me just say I've ended up going for a naked sport bike because that's my favourite type of machine, sport riding, but with a riding position I can live with. Clip-ons are for youngsters and racetracks, and although I may feel very youthful, my knees, wrists and assorted broken, pinned and screwed bones would disagree. My new pet project is to start a series of YouTube videos on this channel about great riding roads that I keep stumbling upon. If you're a regular viewer, you may have cottoned on to the fact that to keep generating the content for our weekly program in South Africa, my wife, who is also my camera woman and editor, and I have moved to the Auvergne region of France, which we use as a base and from where we head off in our old motorhome for a few months at a time to find test bikes and other biking stories for the show. Anyway, as we trundle around Europe, we keep coming across these amazing roads, and it has been so frustrating up to now not having a bike most of the time. They're the sort of roads that inspire you to not only ride them, but share them with your mates as well. And since I consider our YouTube community and the South African audience for the TV show as a kind of extended group of friends, if you like, I decided to get a bike and we can drag it around with us, and then when we happen upon these roads in the future, we can stop for a day or two, we can film the road, whether it's 10 kilometers or 100 kilometers, and then share it with you lot. Who knows, it may inspire some of you to one day experience some of them for yourselves. That's why I wanted a sporty bike, and it had to have a bearable pillion seat for Jax so she can hop on and off between filming spots, and it needs to be comfortable because I'll also use it to head off to pick up test bikes when we're on the road, rather than trying to get the big old motorhome into and out of a variety of congested old European cities where the bike importers always seem to be located. Anyway, enough of the backstory, sorry for that tangent. The bike itself, the chassis, the handling, despite my moaning, is really vastly improved. And the shedding of some weight, especially the lighter wheels, I think, has surely got a fair amount to do with that. The suspension moaning I was doing was about the rear shock. As I was saying, it is a bit soft and bouncy, and when the roads are less than perfect, which is often enough, even here in France, never mind somewhere like South Africa, the rear end does become quite unsettled. It struggles to cope with serious bumps, even bottoming out occasionally, I think, on some of the bigger stuff. And then it also gets a bit too stressed out when forced to deal with lots of consecutive smaller imperfections as well, eventually starting to skip around a bit because it just can't keep its composure. Between the end of the test and now, about another week later as I sit here, I've just reached 1,200 kilometers on the bike, and tomorrow I'm going to be changing the oil and oil filter. Given my mechanicking skills, my next report may well be from a hospital bed, but hopefully even I can manage an oil and oil filter change. Anyway, I did take the C-spanner and screwdriver from under the seat and use them for a very quick play with the rear shock. I've ended up bumping up the preload by just 1 at the moment, so to level 5 when it was in position 4 of what I think is 7 available preload levels, if I remember correctly. And I've gone 3/4 of a turn out from maximum on the rebound damping. Off the top of my head, I can't remember now how many turns it has, 2.5, I think maybe. Although this is a relatively small adjustment, it has surprised me by making a really noticeable difference, both for my own sport riding composure and for taking a pillion, though I think I will play with maybe another 1/4 turn on the damping, so it's a 1/2 turn out from max, and another step on the preload to see if it will improve things even more. There's no ability to adjust the compression damping, by the way, which I suppose is a reflection of the relative budget aspect of the shock. But the changes are well worth doing. I'm about 87 kilos, by the way, probably 92, 93 kilos with my biking kit, just for reference. As yet, I haven't fiddled with the fork. There's preload for each leg and compression damping on one leg and rebound on the other. It is on the soft side, but the front has more control in the standard setting than the rear does. But if I was going to do a track day, for instance, I'd definitely dive in there and stiffen things up a touch. But on the road, where I prefer to be smooth on corner entry and not be hammering on the brakes like the last of the late breakers, I'm actually okay with what the front end is doing at the moment. It's still early days though, and when I get the urge to tinker, which I no doubt will do at some point, then I'll let you know what I end up doing. As for the engine, I'll just reinforce what I said in the test, and that is that this is a superb motor, no question, and quite possibly worthy of greatness. Fantastic sound as standard as well, brilliant airbox noises to back it up, and with just shy of 120 horsepower, it is properly quick as well. It's powerful enough to need treating with some decent respect, but it's not so powerful that you can't exploit it fully. It's a Goldilocks kind of zone for power. Much more than this, and it starts to veer towards the unusable end of the spectrum. As for a replacement exhaust, not for me. I don't want the extra noise to attract attention from the cops, who are a lot more sensitive to that sort of thing here in Europe than they are in South Africa. And to be fair, most of my riding is going to be done in the mountains, and I hate the way a single obnoxiously loud exhaust can ruin that mountain vibe for so many of the locals or hikers or paragliders or climbers or cyclists or whatever. I'm sorry, but I'm one of those old farts who thinks we should have some consideration if we want to be able to keep visiting these amazing locations and riding these epic roads. Peaceful coexistence, man. That's what we need. And by the way, all those of you who do have obnoxiously loud pipes, they make most of you sound like embarrassing amateurs, because we can clearly hear from miles away your tentative and hesitant throttle inputs, your erratic and all too brief full throttle acceleration, your slow ass gear changes and your lame braking and down changes. Oh, and one more exhaust thing. I really like the tucked away look of this standard exhaust. I definitely don't want to spoil the clean rear profile with a big canister down one side. If I could get a similarly discreet one with a slightly fruitier note, then I might consider it, but for the moment I'm very happy, thank you. In terms of the riding modes, there's definitely a noticeable difference between them. 1, 2 and 3 keep the full power. 4 is like a rain mode with super soft throttle response and reduced power. I'll only use that when the snow is up to my chin. 1 offers full power and the most urgent throttle response, and I definitely use that on a circuit, but I found myself in 2 most of the time. Still full power, but a slightly softer throttle. It's just a bit more consistent, less punishing of the occasional imprecise wrist action, like, you know, on a bumpy road or something. 3 gives you an even softer throttle response, but given how good both 2 and 1 are, this is definitely not going to get much use. Oh, yeah, and I have the customizable mode on the dash, which allows me to keep the drive mode in 2, but then I have traction control and anti-slip in 1, the least intrusive settings, and I've turned the anti-wheelie, anti-lift thing off completely because, well, irresponsible 55-year-old child. The anti-lift thing I've had a quick play with, and it's quite interesting. I need to spend some more time with it, but it seems accommodating in the way that it will control the lift, allowing you to get at least some front wheel elevation, and there isn't too much of a limiting action that you end up headbutting the TFT screen when you run into it. And while I'm on about the engine, let me share my running in technique. I don't. At all. I ride it like I'll always ride it. From the moment I picked it up, I've always done that with my new bikes, and without fail, they've always been some of the healthiest in terms of dyno numbers and feel that I've ever seen for whichever model it happens to be. And before you ask, no. As far as I know, none of them has been especially unreliable over the long term either. As far as I'm concerned, a few relatively gentle kilometers on the first ride, mainly for the benefit of brakes and suspension components to make sure it's all working properly. Nothing's going to fall off and the brake pads can bed in nicely, and that's it. After that, I ride it hard, but sensibly. I let it warm up in the morning, I don't hold on to the red line unnecessarily, and I don't lug around at just above tick over in too tall a gear, and I don't do boring constant throttle motorway work. I've been to too many bike factories and seen too many bikes, including supposedly fragile, expensive sport bikes, come off the end of a production line and get strapped immediately to a rolling road and redlined through each gear before being packed away for delivery, to bother wasting 1,000 kilometres or more of my life riding like a myopic octogenarian with agoraphobia. Nah. Run it in by riding it like you're always going to ride it. That's my recommendation. What else? Fit and finish is, considering the relative bargain price point, actually very good. The seat is surprisingly comfortable. It's not a touring couch, but it's not terrible either. The mirrors are excellent, rock solid even at speed, and it's easy to get a good view of what's going on behind you. I am partial to a nice, clear, solid mirror. My extras that I fitted, well, the screen looks good, I think, but does next to nothing for wind protection. I have a very slouchy riding posture, so at just under 6 feet I can stay comfortable up to about 130 k's an hour or so, 140 at a push. For me, that's a positive thing. There's too many ways to get caught speeding in Europe these days for me to have a bike where you can inadvertently do the sort of speeds that will see your bike confiscated and you spending a few weeks or even a few months in jail. After South Africa's lax speeding laws and, let's face it, the ability to buy your way out of just about any situation, I need a naked bike to help me stay out of the clutches of the law over here. The heated grips I fitted are brilliant. I hadn't realised when I ordered them that they would be controlled via the scrolling wheel on the handlebar and have a dedicated display in a part of the TFT screen. I was properly chuffed when I realised that's how well integrated they are. 10 levels of adjustability may be a bit of overkill, but they vary from way too hot to barely noticeable warming, so I'm a happy customer. The Radiator Guard was also a no-brainer. I've seen too many expensive damaged radiators in my time, and this one is neat and with some subtle MT-09 badging, so that's a win. And something else, isn't there? Yes, the shortened number plate holder. Good quality again, and obviously only for my own shallow, selfish desires. I hate the look of the overly long but legal standard item. Annoying stuff? The turning circle is disappointingly crap for a naked bike. It's caught me out a couple of times and forced an embarrassing foot dab, but I'm learning to live with it. The positioning of the rectifier and especially the horn, they do leave something to be desired. And there are one or two really cheap looking bits of sheathing for wiring or nasty looking cable ties where you see them every time you ride. I'll get around to smartening those up in the future, but they're mildly irritating things rather than major annoyances. And I think that's about it for now. If you're still awake, well done. Thanks for hanging in there. If you've been watching because you're looking for extra info on the MT-09, I hope this has been helpful, and I'll say it again, this is a tremendous bike, a very capable and entertaining sport bike, and I really can't think of any other model at the moment that offers this much bang for the buck. Thinking of buying one? Stop thinking. Just go and buy it.